Well, welcome everyone to Advocacy in Action, where we dive into the real world strategies that power political engagement. I'm your host, Kim Durcho, and today we're diving into some of the most talked about legislative developments, from AI regulation to the SAVE Act, and what they mean for advocates and government relations professionals on the ground. Then we'll shift gears a little bit and talk about what's working, the tools, the tactics, and the tech that are helping teams stay ahead in an ever-changing landscape. Joining me today are two good friends and the team I lean on when I have questions about state legislation, complicated federal bills, and really anything bill tracking. The team at BillTrack 50. We've had a wonderful partnership with BillTrack 50 for years, going on a decade now, and they are truly a leading bill tracking service for federal and state legislation and an integral part of our technology services for members. First, I've got Karen Suhaka with us. She started her career as a statistician at Halliburton, but soon started a government database company serving the oil industry. After a successful exit or two, she pivoted to legislative data, founding BillTrack 50 in 2011. She's proud to serve both the public and legislative professionals, striving to increase transparency and accountability in these interesting times. And they are truly interesting. That's
every day.
Not an understatement. Next, we have Stephen Rogers. Stephen taught English in far-flung places for many years before returning to the UK and moving into public policy. He worked for the British government for over a decade, initially in the education department before moving across to environmental policy. He joined BillTrack 50 in 2023 as a data wrangler. I absolutely love that title. And he also writes about interesting legislative trends and co-hosts the podcast Beyond the Bill Number. He is also the author behind our Bill of the Month feature in the membership mix for BIPAC members. So thank you, Stephen, for putting together that content each month. And with that, I think we're just going to dive in, guys. We have a pretty meaty episode for you here, so stick with us. There's a lot of really interesting content to dive into, but we're just going to kind of start with ripping the Band-Aid off. Let's talk a little bit about AI regulation. It's obviously making headlines at both the federal and state levels, but when you think about this kind of from the lens of an advocacy professional and government relations professionals, what should we be watching closely right now?
Absolutely. So, well, first of all, thanks very much for having us on, Kim, and for that particularly generous introduction there. We're delighted to be here, and obviously really happy to partner with BIPAC. So yeah, AI is huge at the moment. There are so many different bills at sort of the state level on all sorts of different areas, really. And there's also this sort of regulatory whiplash with AI going on at the moment. So people will remember that back in January, President Trump signed the executive order removing barriers to American leadership in AI. And one of the things that did was actually reverse President Biden's more safety-focused approach. So it reversed one of his executive orders. And so President Trump very clearly there prioritizing innovation over restrictions on AI and saying the most important thing in America is making sure that we don't lose our sort of leadership role in AI. And that's more important than actually regulating it and making sure it's safe, really. And then in the House, right at the moment, you've got a very interesting debate where they are looking at a potential 10-year moratorium on all AI regulation, which is pretty wild, really. Can you try and imagine where we'll be in 10 years with AI? It's impossible to see. I mean, all we can really hope is that there are still people around and that it's not just AI there. So the idea that you're not going to regulate for the next 10 years is pretty wild, really. So that's the federal level, but at the state level, there's a lot going on as well, really, and it's quite the opposite. While at a federal level, you've got actually slowing action, states are accelerating regulation, particularly following the lead of the EU AI Act, which was signed last year. So you're seeing a lot of state initiatives that are targeting things like AI surveillance, generative AI, deepfakes in elections, autonomous vehicles, healthcare applications, all of those kind of things, really. But what I've been looking at recently, I did a sort of a blog on this a while ago, is algorithmic discrimination. So this is something that really certainly exciting a lot of interest among a variety of different states. So algorithmic discrimination is where AI systems that are used in decision making reflect very human biases. So it's also sometimes called algorithmic sort of bias as well. So some examples of this, you've got Compass, which is a criminal justice system application. And that's actually a while ago, there was a big scandal about it because it was predicting higher reoffense rates for Black defendants than white defendants. You've had medical algorithms that underestimated Black patients' needs. You've got hiring systems that exclude older applicants automatically, particularly older women. So there's all these kinds of examples that have sort of come out, though. I mean, some people do say that these are actually quite rare and that they were caught and stopped. So actually, that's a sign that the current regulation is actually working. Whereas obviously other people are saying, well, we need much stricter regulation here as well. So the bill that really set all this off was last year back in Colorado. They pioneered this regulation with Senate Bill 205. And Senate Bill 205 required developers to prevent discrimination in any kind of consequential decision making. So it required them to disclose risks, provide transparency, and then anybody deploying these systems had to conduct impact assessments and in particular notify people when AI was affecting any decisions that were made about them. So that was last year, but they really struggled in Colorado to actually implement this bill. Governor Polis, he signed the bill, but he had some real concerns about it, really, and said he was worried that it would create this really complex compliance regime, which would make it quite difficult for companies to actually operate. So they set up what they call the AI Impact Task Force to actually look at the implementation of this particular bill. And back in February, it published a report with a variety of different recommendations, quite sweeping, really, saying that they needed to revise a lot of the key definitions, they needed to extend implementation timelines, and they needed to adjust thresholds for small businesses in particular, so that small businesses wouldn't be impacted by this. So you would think then, with the difficulties that Colorado's had, that other states would be sort of taking a step back and saying, oh, well, let's sort of wait and see what happens in Colorado before we do anything here, but they're not. So I looked across all of the bills that we've got this year, and I found about 80 different bills in a variety of different states that are trying to do similar things to the Colorado bill, really. Now, you might think that these bills would very much follow partisan lines. So you'd expect to see the blue states actually pushing for more regulation. But actually, what's interesting here is that's not what's happening. So this year, 2 states have already passed similar legislation. They are Kentucky and Montana. Not known as sort of liberal bastions, really, there. So it is concern that sort of crosses this partisan divide, and seems to be a lot of worry about this out there, despite President Trump's push to actually have states just go and let's have more and more AI, really. So things to look out for with this legislation then is if you're looking at the legislation, trying to decide whether is it a good bill or is it a bad bill? Is it how is it going to impact business in particular? Is it going to make it more difficult or easier to do business? It's looking for, do they have really clearly defined terms to avoid this sort of implementation confusion that's beset the Colorado bill, really? And also, are there these sort of periods where rather than going straight for enforcement and imposing penalties on companies, are there actually cure periods where you say, okay, you've now got 6 months, you've got 12 months to actually fix this problem before we come after you? And then, of course, these exemptions for small businesses are absolutely crucial, really, that small businesses are going to be impacted by this. And what we'd really like to see out there, of course, is cross-state coordination, so that lots of states are actually coming up with similar regimes, which would make it much, much easier for business, because unfortunately we are going to end up with this sort of very patchwork approach with companies having to do a lot of sort of compliance work to make sure that they're complying with all the different laws.
Yeah, so a lot to unpack there, clearly. And the states never make it easy on us. Like you said,
Nope.
like everyone's a little bit unique, a little bit different. I think one thing that comes up in our space a lot, especially when we think about government relations, is like generative AI and like, is it actually, I call it hallucinating, right? But like, is it actually making up facts? And then are we taking that content and using it for campaigns and asking people to write a letter and send it on, right? So like, these are the concerns of like our community. And some folks that I work with are like really leaning into it, and like they're utilizing AI, especially generative AI, pretty heavily. And others are like, ooh, like we've had some pretty big missteps. So I don't know if you have thoughts on
Yeah,
that side of it as well,
it,
outside of
it
the
is. I
strict
mean,
legislation? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I use AI a lot in sort of writing my
Yeah.
blog posts and doing everything really. And now every aspect of work is sort of including that. And I'm really, really concerned about when it hallucinates. And I check and ask the AI all the time, are you sure about that? And very often it'll come back and say, no, sorry, I made that one up.
Mm.
Yeah, you probably shouldn't use that. But in a way, those things are quite easy to catch. I think where it's really worrying is where you've got similar issues going on behind the scenes. So these systems that are making those really important decisions about people's lives, are they also making data up and making decisions based on really faulty data? And how do you know that? And that's where obviously this regulation comes in. You want to make sure that somebody somewhere is checking that these systems are actually making decisions that are based on fact and they aren't making stuff up.
Yeah, yeah, it's really critical. So let's go ahead and shift gears a little bit. Another, kind of hotly debated issue that's risen here, the SAVE Act, right? Obviously, it sparked a lot of debate.
Mm.
I think it's complicated though, and it's hard to kind of read through and look at the nuances and like how does this actually play out in the real world, right? Like what are the true implications? So can you just walk us through that a little bit? Kind of what are the core issues? How might this truly play out?
Sure, yeah. So the SAVE Act, or the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act, as it's actually called, it has become this sort of lightning rod in political discourse over a number of years now, but particularly this year. It's very popular with Republicans, basically because it neatly combines two of their really key concerns here. So you've got voter fraud and you've got immigration. So it's like a mashup between two of those sort of really, really popular policies for Republicans. So the SAVE Act is actually House Resolution 22. It's led by Congressman Chip Roy of Texas, a very familiar sort of name in these areas. But it is backed by numerous Republican sponsors as well. So it's got a lot of support among the Republicans. And in a nutshell, what it does is it amends the National Voter Registration Act of 1993 to require proof of citizenship when registering for federal elections. So this is really a big move in this space. There have been a lot of bills over the past few years that have required voters to actually bring ID with them to the polls, and that's becoming pretty ubiquitous now. But this takes it a step further, because this isn't about ID at the polls. This is about actually proving not only who you are, but also your citizenship at that point of registration. So it's in a much earlier stage of the process, and sort of imposes quite onerous requirements on that. So the kind of ID that you need to provide when registering to vote is something like a real ID compliant identification card. Obviously, a valid passport would do, but also military ID with service records that show your US birth, some kind of government issue photo ID showing a birthplace, or a combination of these things, particularly including birth certificates with other type of ID. So it's all quite complicated and quite onerous, quite difficult to understand exactly what's going to be required.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, some states allow, registration when you get your driver's license, right? Some don't, some do online, some don't, right? Some are still by mail. So like, what are I mean, I think about that because of the programs we run, like Employee Voter Registration Week. What does this actually look like in real practice?
Yes, well, that's what's really hard to know with this bill, because the bill doesn't go into an enormous amount of details about it. I mean, its stated purpose is very simple. It's to make the elections more secure by ensuring that non-citizens aren't voting. So that's really what it's focused on. But there's it's really hard to know how it would work in actual practice at the state level, because each state has a different approach. And the bill, crucially, doesn't actually provide any money for doing this, and it doesn't provide any time either. So as soon as this bill was enacted, states would have to start doing this, and it would require them really to completely rework the way their registration processes work, and then, of course, communicate that to voters in a sort of timely enough manner to actually allow people to get together all the necessary paperwork and documents and things. And it's almost impossible to see how that could work, how it could work in practice. And the thing about this really is you can sort of have some sympathy here, because nobody wants non-citizens voting in elections. It's quite clearly that elections are for sort of native-born people or for citizens, and that it shouldn't be for anybody else really. But when you look at actual elections in America, you can say, okay, well, is this actually a problem? So is there a problem to solve here? And there's very little evidence of this. So the Brennan Center for Justice examined the 2016 election, and it found that only 0.0001% of votes cast were even suspected of being from non-citizens. And the Heritage Foundation has been looking for evidence of this for years. The Heritage Foundation, obviously a conservative organization, very keen on actually sort of proving that this kind of voter fraud exists. And they only managed to find 77 instances of sort of this kind of fraud between 1999 and 2023. And you can imagine how many millions and millions of votes were cast in that time. So it's a tiny, tiny proportion. And various state level audits as well have sort of failed to find any evidence of this. So it is quite difficult to see the justification for such a sort of a sweeping change.
Yeah, so we'll see how this plays out. Obviously, BIPAC will be tracking this closely because this certainly impacts some of our core mission programs. So thank you for kind of walking us through that, because it can be quite a bit confusing, to be sure. So I want to change gears a little bit here. I want to talk about kind of tips, tricks, tools, and that's definitely something that we always want folks to take away from these episodes. Because we were speaking mostly to government relations professionals and how do they more efficiently, how do they better do their jobs, right? So I guess just kind of broadly, what's one best practice that you all maybe have adopted this year, especially given we know things are wild out there, it's the Wild West. But what's something you've adopted for staying ahead of just these rapidly shifting legislative landscapes?
Well, as Stephen has highlighted, all the states are where the action is, and the states can take very different approaches to how they're trying to solve different problems. And so about a year ago, we introduced a tool on Bill Track 50 called Similar Bills, creatively named. And it's free for anyone to use, so anyone can register for an account and use this tool. But it lets you take a bill that you have seen in the news or that you know about or that you care about and lets you see what the states are doing across the board. And so developing it, we were not hopeful that it was really going to work. It was so much testing and so much back and forth and trying different things. But when it started to come into focus, we started to get really excited. And at this point, we're very proud of it, and our users have given us great feedback. But we are using it all the time because it lets you see quickly the context of your bill. So are a bunch of states doing this? Has it been successful? Have a bunch of states done it and it's never been successful? Like, where are you at? What's the different language? What are the different ideas around this policy? So in the past, we would try to do this kind of research using keywords, which, with brand new topics like AI, are they going to call it a deep fake? Are they going to call it deceptive media? Are they going to call it, like, coming up with even the words for a brand new, like, there's a bunch of Doge bills. That wasn't a word last year, right? So, like, you can put it in and see, like, what's going on across the country, which has been such a lifesaver for us to get your arms around a topic just to begin, right? It's the right first step. And I think, Stephen, you'd say you're using it all the time when you're trying to research stuff to figure out topics like what we're talking about today. So that is like a brand new thing, and our new best practice is like take a look across the country first to get your context before you start your deep dive.
Yeah. And we work with a lot of folks that, they don't get to just cover one or two states. They're covering these massive regions. And you're like, wow, those like demographically, those states just shouldn't even be in your same portfolio. But something like this sounds like it could be extremely helpful for folks like that trying to manage that broad swath. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Any other tools, any other technology, yours or other, that you've found that's just like really kind of made things more efficient, or maybe it's a new emerging trend you've seen?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously my answers are going to be all AI centric, but we have started, and if you haven't done this, you really should try it. So we've implemented it internally so that we can chat with a bill. But you can do it externally. All you need is the bill PDF, and you give it to your favorite chat tool and ask it some basic questions about the bill. And that is a very helpful way to like get started on a brand new topic. So if you're not quite sure what all the different impacts would be, what the implementation might mean, who the different stakeholders are, who might be for it, who might be against it, it's a good way to like get started and get your first kind of picture of the whole universe around a bill. And so we've been doing that quite a bit, and we have found that to be really valuable, is to just there's less hallucination when you give a chat tool one specific document, and then you're talking about that specific document. And so we have found that to be pretty helpful. So give that a go if you, for some reason, haven't tried that yet.
Yeah, that's a great tip for our extremely busy advocacy professionals, just trying to get like just a little bit of information on something like, especially when it's just, you know, if it's hundreds of pages long, right?
Exactly. And it's just someone to chat with on a topic
Yeah.
that no one else is going to want to chat with you about. We've also built this executive order tool, which we have found very useful as things are developing so quickly. So, of course, Congress isn't really passing bills. Apparently not their jam anymore, but the states certainly are. And so with all of the executive orders, record numbers so far this year, some of them are going to have like widespread state impact. And so states are reacting. And like I mentioned, there's a bunch of Doge bills that actually say Doge. There's DEI bills. But the states, some of them are like implementing policies that support the administration's goals, but some of them are implementing policies that are attempting to protect their states from the administration's priorities. And so by having the executive orders and having that similar bill next to the executive orders, that has really helped us keep up with how things are developing on tariff issues, on all sorts of issues that could affect businesses or citizens or, you know, people across the board. So that is proven quite useful. That is also free. If you want to use it, you can go to billtry50.com and it's in the tracking menu at the very top. So, you know, give that a go if you're interested. But it's a great way to see like the whole sweep of what's going on across the country. One other thing that we've done is we've started to do like bespoke AI at scale. So we'll write a prompt specifically that one of our clients about their specific business and get the AI to do the very first cut of, is this relevant? Is this not relevant? What would the impacts be? Does it affect this part of our business or this part of our business or all of it? Or, you know, and so you can write quite a complex prompt and feed a bunch of bills through it real quickly and have that be your helping hand to get your first cut. And so we've implemented that kind of happening automatically behind the scenes for certain customers, but there's no reason you can't do it yourself. Just get your prompt, and once you're happy with your prompt, then you can feed bills through pretty quickly. And so that has been another way that we've been using AI to help people get their first crack at it.
That's really cool. This is not a space I get to like play in very often. So these are really, really unique things. So I always like to talk about lessons learned. Anything I ever host, that's like always one of my questions. Like, what have you learned, whether it's recent or through the years, especially for folks that are like maybe new to this, maybe we have some people that are really kind of dipping into the state level for the first time. What's kind of a lessons learned over the years for each of you? I'd love to know, like, what have you run up against and been like, oh, okay, yep, I missed that one, or, you know, should have taken a different tactic.
Well, I've been waxing eloquent about AI, but it turns out that should only be your first step. So it can go sideways fast, and it will make updates and it will make up other things. Stephen mentioned about, you know, you've got to check for hallucinations. And so learned very much, you absolutely still have to read the bill. You absolutely still have to do your homework. And you need to sit and think, like, completely understand the issues from your point of view, but think about the other side and don't get carried away on your, like, give an honest hearing of what the other side might think, and not like a distorted version of what they think, but what they really think and what their arguments really are, and come to grips with that. And so like that was a lesson that we learned about, you know, you've got to really understand it and give the other side a fair hearing if you're genuinely going to understand and be able to persuade and advocate on your side. You have to be prepared for reasonable objections. Otherwise, people won't hear you if you just put their argument in the wrong light. And also, try to chart a middle path if you can. So especially if it's not like your core thing that you care about, you know, the administrations change, culture changes, technology changes. And so don't get pulled too far off to one side. Don't lose if you can help it, try to like, I mean, this is pretty obvious, but if you can, like the middle way is a good way. And so we've tried very hard not to get pulled too much one way or the other, because when you do, yeah, people will say some stuff on Twitter. So yeah, learn that one. I don't know if you have any thoughts, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I came over to working in American legislation after British legislation. There's a really big difference there. And one of the first things that I realized is you need to develop the ability to cut through the noise. So there's so many bills. I mean, you have like 250,000 bills over 2 years introduced, which is crazy. Only a tiny percentage of them will ever actually become law. And a lot of them aren't even designed to become law. They are just there to provoke a response. They're just there to allow legislators to sort of burnish their credentials and say, oh, look how strong I am on X, Y, and Z. They know they're never going to become law. And it's really important not to become distracted by that and focus on it. And then you miss this other bill over here that's probably not quite as eye-catching, but is the one that's actually going to be enacted and actually make a difference to you. So developing that skill to develop to seeing whether a bill is going to pass and then what kind of impact it's going to have is really, really important.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think about that, we obviously, we host advocacy websites for a lot of our members, and a lot of them, do state legislation. And if they send their advocates off on every little thing, right, to comment on this and write a letter on that, it's like, you're going to wear your own people out too, right? To your point, you have to be able to pick up those nuances. Like, is this truly something that's going to get legs? It's going to become kind of dangerous for us, for our industry, or is it really just, it's been introduced, but it's not going anywhere.
Right. Don't flame the thing. Don't fan the flames and make the sensationalism worse or the alarmist stuff worse.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't prep this one when we kind of had our, pre-work on this, but would love to know, have either of you kind of had like a favorite bill over the years, or was there something just like really funny or really interesting? We talk about this from time to time. I think the bill of the month has been eye-opening for me. We've done some fun things, but we just love, like, if there's anything just even unique you've come across over the years. Would you flag anything?
I was real fond of when New Mexico made red or green their state question. I thought that was a lot of fun. Yeah,
bill.
that's my
There was
favorite.
the feral chicken bill in Hawaii.
I think with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's episode of Advocacy in Action. But first, a huge thank you to Karen and Stephen, our guests, for sharing your insights, your practical tips. There was a lot here for folks to noodle on, but take away some really good things that they can implement, I think, in their own programs. Whether it's tracking legislation, leveraging new tech, or navigating hot button issues, the tools for advocacy are evolving. We see this constantly in our space, but we need to evolve too, right? So with that, I would just say, don't forget to subscribe, share, stay engaged. You can check us out on social media. You can check the Bill Track 50 team out on social media as well. I'll also just flag, we recently launched a blog on BIPAC.org, so you can go there, visit that. We will have some information on this topic and many others on different episodes of Advocacy in Action like this and more. So with that, thank you both again, and thank you for everyone for listening.
Thank you very much.